It's safe to say a lot of lives were changed in 1987 with the release of Robocop, Paul Verhoeven's deliciously violent, weirdly funny work of outsider art. Seriously, can you imagine a major studio releasing that now?
Bitches leave!
It's nearly impossible to fit the movie into a box. It's a sci-fi action picture, it's a horror movie, it's a satire, it's a drama about what it means to be human. It's a hard R, even by today's standards. And yet it also targeted kids with video games and action figure tie-ins. This movie had a toy line from Kenner.
You won't catch us. You'll be hiding out in prison now.
The 1980s were a hell of a time. It took a while before the inevitable happened. A Robocop remake finally saw the light of day in 2014 from Brazilian director Jose Padilha, although at one time Darren Aronofsky was supposed to take the helm. Packing a PG-13 rating and a sensibility that's worlds away from the original, the remake sought to update the same basic story of a badly wounded cop who is turned into a machine, while keeping at least some of the cleverness and social commentary of its predecessor. We know Robocop is able to make mincemeat out of just about any adversary, human or mechanical. But what happens when he's squaring off against himself? There's only one way to find out. Face off! Disclaimer. No actual science was used to determine the outcome of Face Off. Your results may vary. Please do not consume Face Off if you are allergic to conjecture, opinion, or general nonsense. Round 1. Robocop. Early on, both films give us a brief glimpse at Officer Alex Murphy, a family man who sustains a brutal attack and is ultimately used in a risky experiment by a ruthless corporation. This transforms the man into a robotic police officer, an initially successful undertaking until he starts thinking for himself, remembering his past and seeking vengeance against those responsible for his near-death experience. In the original, Peter Weller's Robocop is a stone-faced, strong, silent type, rocking an awesome, if bulky, state-of-the-art suit and helmet. Initially something of a blank slate,
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.
the humanity in Robocop begins to manifest when his memories refuse to recede into the darkness. Without a wife and kid, and only revenge to cling to, Robocop makes for a surprisingly tragic and sympathetic hero the more you get to know him. The remake gives us a little more face time, shall we say, with Murphy, both before and after his brush with death. Not the happy-go-lucky Alex we first meet in the original, this Murphy is a brooding, streetwise good cop out to expose corruption in the police department. Once he's blown up by his nemesis and subsequently turned into Robocop, Murphy still maintains most of his former self.
Like a daddy suit needs some special handling.
Well, from the chin up anyway, he's an emotional guy, and the filmmakers ensure we actually see that by keeping star Joel Kinnaman's face visible throughout most of the film. The new Robocop design is sleeker and more agile, but it's not nearly as intimidating or captivating as the original look. While Kinnaman is just fine in the role, it's asking a whole lot to make this a close contest, with Peter Weller's restrained and touching performance combined with the overall cool factor of the first Robocop design, making this version of the character just too iconic to ignore. This round goes to Robocop 1987. Round 2, Supporting Cast. Both Robocop movies give Murphy a bevy of interesting characters to interact with, and both versions fill those roles well. In the original, Murphy's main ally is Officer Lewis, who knows Murphy all of 5 minutes before she's treated to the horrible sight of his gory demise. Nancy Allen suits the role, making Lewis a likable presence who can also hold her own. There's also some great character actors in the film, most of them playing slimeballs, like Ronnie Cox as the despicable corporate shark Dick Jones, Kurtwood Smith as evil gang boss Clarence Boddicker,
Just give me my fucking phone call.
and Miguel Ferrer as power-hungry robo-creator Bob Morton, all so perfectly cast you can't picture anyone else in those roles. Not to be outdone, the remake has a fairly impressive supporting cast, featuring some prominent A-listers. Michael Keaton has a lot of fun playing an energetic but soulless CEO. Gary Oldman gives his usual 110% as the scientist who regrettably brings Robocop to life. And Samuel L. Jackson reliably chews the scenery as a cynical cable news host.
This mother...
The cast is rounded out with familiar faces like Jackie Earle Haley, Michael K. Williams, and Jay Baruchel, which ensures that the Robocop remake is at least always putting an interesting performer on screen. The original ensemble is unforgettable, but the remake assembles a pretty top-notch cast itself. So, just to be fair, let's call this round a draw. Round 3. Villains. Look, we're not going to mess around here. While the remake has a few loathsome figures crawling around, the original gives us some truly wicked bastards to root against. Not even their own mothers could love these dudes. Only about 15 minutes into the original, we meet Clarence Boddicker and his crew, a true rogues gallery of trigger-happy psychos. Though we don't know Murphy or his killers very well at this point, the gang's sadistic execution of the police officer immediately makes us completely sympathetic towards Murphy, while guaranteeing that we will greatly anticipate the gang's inevitable extermination. That said, it's kinda weird that Clarence turns out to be a pretty amusing guy.
Maybe you could, fit me in.
In another scenario, he might be fun to hang out with. Higher up the crime ladder is Dick Jones, and he's no less sadistic, a seriously rotten fellow who we can't wait to see in cuffs, or worse. There's even a mechanical baddie in the scary shape of Ed 209, which is almost like Dick Jones's attack dog, and even though it has no human brain calling the shots, it has evil written all over it. The remake's version of corporate sleaze comes in the form of Michael Keaton's Raymond Sellers, and while he's as cruel and greedy as you'd expect, we don't really end up hating him the way we should. There also is not a new Clarence equivalent in the update, although Murphy has a beef with a Eurotrash gunrunner who does not make much of an impact. There are some corrupt cops in the mix as well, and Jackie Earle Haley resonates as a nasty stooge. But really, there's no comparison between the two movies in the dirtbag department. This round goes to Robocop, 1987. Round 4. Action and Violence. Here's another case where it's not much of a fair fight, but we'll give it a go. As previously mentioned, the original film is rated R, so very R, while the remake got restrained with a PG-13, and the proof of both ratings is right there on the screen. Even during the action-heavy 80s, Robocop took things to another level with its massive amount of bloodshed, giving us not one but two insane death sequences in the first half hour. Murphy's own slaughter, and Ed 209 turning poor Mr. Kinney into beefaroni. Beyond that, we see Robocop shoot about 24 guys to death, an epic battle between robotic gladiators, and a final, very satisfying slice of revenge served deluxe style against Clarence's crew. And that includes the utterly grotesque, yet strangely hilarious, toxic waste death of Emile. Predictably, the remake relies more on straightforward action than off-the-wall violence to engage us. And while there is a handful of entertaining sequences, like when Robocop has to put down about 20 automated coppers or square off against the updated Ed 209s, the movie never really rises to the occasion on this front, with so much of the action looking very digital. That's not a phenomenon isolated to the Robocop remake, of course, but you know us, we'll take squibs and toxic slop over CGI motorcycle chases any day of the week. This round goes to Robocop, 1987. Round 5. Visual Effects. About 27 years separate the original Robocop and its remake, so naturally some difference in visual effects quality is to be expected. But bigger and more expensive doesn't always equal better, as you're probably aware. The original had some groundbreaking work done by Rob Bottin and the great Phil Tippett, who helped bring the glorious monstrosity known as Ed 209 to life. Even by today's standards, that thing is a marvel to look at, and so much more alive than the CGI versions we see in the remake. Almost all of the effects in the original film were accomplished practically, including the very uncomfortable suit Peter Weller was bound into, all of the gun battles, and yes, toxic waste Emile. If you want to count the commercials sprinkled through the movie, you're treated to an eye-popping dinosaur, courtesy of the Kyoto brothers, who gifted us with killer clowns from outer space just a year later. The 2014 Robocop, as expected, has lots of CGI, from the swarms of robotic soldiers that Robocop has to fight, to the Ed 209s and many drones we see throughout. For our money, the remake's coolest and creepiest moment comes when Murphy is shown just how little of him is left, as Dr. Gary Oldman demonstrates in no uncertain terms that poor Alex is basically just a talking head. Now that's using CGI to effectively sell a moment. The effects in the remake are decent, if pretty standard modern-day work, but when almost every movie nowadays seems to have elaborate visual effects going on, this is nothing worthy of effusive praise. Since the original is more concerned with real-world violence than flashy visual effects, we'll count this one as a draw. Just don't tell Ed 209. Round 6. Vision of the Future. An interesting aspect of both Robocop films is that they take place in a future that is not particularly futuristic, mechanical law enforcement aside. The Detroit in the original is a real hellscape, an industrial nightmare city overflowing with murderers and thieves, a place that Omni Consumer Products wants to transform into a yuppie utopia. In this world, OCP literally owns the police department, and the number 2 guy at the corporation is willing to sacrifice public safety to greenlight his faulty security program. Hate to say that it's not all that far-fetched. The remake similarly doesn't get too high-tech, although it has its share of cool gadgets. And in this era of drone warfare, the idea of robot soldiers patrolling a foreign land doesn't seem like a stretch. Overall, the movie, perhaps correctly, envisions a 2028 that isn't overtly futuristic. But we still have to give the edge to the original, with its distinctively bleak look at an American war zone, where multi-billion-dollar corporations work hand-in-hand with street scum. This round goes to Robocop, 1987. Round 7, Satire and Humor. Okay, we know, this isn't really fair since it's so lopsided, but let's count the ways we love Robocop's clever, outlandish sense of humor. You'd think a movie with so much nastiness wouldn't be so funny, but you'd be dead wrong. While its targeting of the Reagan 80s and obsession with capitalism aren't exactly subtle,
I'd buy that for $1.
the original Robocop manages to find humor in the strangest moments. Where else are you gonna find this reaction, mere seconds after a man has been blown to chunks by a giant robot?
Dick, I'm very disappointed.
And as big and freaky as he is, Ed 209 provides moments of levity. And even Robocop is allowed to be funny sometimes.
Any special message for all the kids watching at home?
Stay out of trouble.
Of course, you also have those wonderfully goofy commercials and news reports that cheerfully detail all kinds of human atrocities. And hell, even the film's final moments are actually pretty amusing. And who could forget the movie's most memorable catchphrase, which comes not from any of the main characters, but from an absolutely ridiculous sitcom that is apparently enjoyed by everyone in Detroit.
I'd buy that for $1.
Just because Robocop has some of the most disturbing violence you could ask for does not mean the movie is a bummer. In fact, it's ultimately quite uplifting. The remake is not concerned with levity. It pretty much ditches any real satire or subtext, being content with its straight-arrow action sequences with a few jabs at big bad corporate greed. The closest it ever gets to the tone of the original is during the all-too-brief Samuel L. Jackson appearances as a conservative cable news blowhard, who actually says this at one point.
Why is America so robophobic?
These moments of absurdity are, unfortunately, few and far between, and truth be told, the movie could have used a bit more humor to spice up the proceedings. This round goes to Robocop, 1987. Final verdict. We're gonna guess this doesn't come as too much of a surprise, but if nothing else, we've just given you yet another reminder that Paul Verhoeven's Robocop is a stroke of genius, a unique ride unlike any other. The remake was most likely fighting a losing battle right from the jump, though a little more humor and, dare we say, a little more heart would have gone a long way towards making this a closer battle. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're gonna hop into our 6000 SUX and hit the road. Winner, Robocop, 1987.
Bitches leave.
Well, we know where we're going, but we don't know where we've been. And we know what we're knowing, but we can't say what we've seen. And we're not little children, and we know what we want, and the future is certain. Give us time to work it out.